Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you're watching us from. On behalf of Nepal Institute for International Cooperation and Engagement and Water Policy Center, I welcome you all. It gives me great pleasure to extend a very warm welcome to our distinguished chair, Ambassador Ashok Sajjanhar, speakers, and participants who registered for the event. We're so glad that you could join us today at the NICE WPS International Conference on Post-Pandemic World Order, Navigating the New Normal. Throughout the 3 days conference, we will be having 30 sessions that will take place at 2 Zoom rooms simultaneously. We have around 150 experts and speakers joining us from 30 different countries who will be delivering their presentations and sharing their expertise with us. This is the 5th session of the conference. To chair and moderate this session, it's a great pleasure to have with us Ambassador Ashok Sajjanhar. Mr. Ashok Sajjanhar is presently the President of Institute of Global Studies in New Delhi. He holds honors and master's degree in physics from Delhi University and commenced his service career as a staff officer in one of India's largest public sector banks, Bank of India. Switching to a career in diplomacy, Mr. Sajjanhar has held various significant positions in Indian embassies in Moscow, Tehran, Geneva, Dhaka, Bangkok, etc. Mr. Sajjanhar's professional interests include international trade, and during his assignment in Geneva from 1988 to 1992, he made significant contribution while representing India in the Uruguay round of multilateral trade negotiations. He continued to negotiate on behalf of India up to 1994. Mr. Sajjanhar has held the position of Director in Indian Foreign Service Institute, New Delhi, where he introduced many innovative methods in training curriculum. A keen proponent of Indian culture, he was the director of Jawaharlal Nehru Culture Center in Moscow, where he was instrumental in ushering in a new paradigm in cultural diplomacy. Mr. Sajjanhar was the Deputy Chief at Mission as well as the Deputy Permanent Representative of India to UNSCAP during his assignment in Bangkok from 2000 to 2003. He was Deputy Chief of Mission in the Mission to European Union, Belgium and Luxembourg from 2005 to 2007 and Ambassador of India to Kazakhstan from 2007 to 2010. Without any further ado, let me now request Ambassador Ashok Sajjanhar to moderate the session. Sir, the floor is all yours.
So we have 4 presentations, or you are also going to be joining us with your presentation?
So we have Bharti Chiba, Nand Kishore, Dr. Sanjeev and Gulbin Sultana.
I see. So Dr. Sitakant Mishra is not with us.
No, he dropped at the last one.
He dropped out. Okay, not to worry, not to worry. So since we are already running a little late, I will not make any introductory remarks. I think all the introductory remarks that have been made, that needed to be made, were made in the inaugural session. We've already had a couple of sessions now, so I think there is a good momentum to this discussions. There's a good momentum that we have to the discussions. And so without further ado, except that I would like to thank Professor Pramod Jaiswal for getting us all together, and notwithstanding these rather unprecedented and unusual times, that there are such a large number of people who have been able to get together on the same platform. I think that's quite remarkable. So without further ado, I will start with our speakers. And as I could hear, Dr. Chibar, Bharti Chibar, you said you'll be speaking about the ASEAN. So we have a very diverse area to cover in our session. I know before I give the floor to you, Madam, you know, I have always been told in diplomacy that if you want to maintain good relations and friendship with your audience, never stand between them and their lunch. But I think this is exactly what we will have to do. We'll have to stand between you and your lunch. And I thank you very much, all of you, for coming here and being with us. I'm sure you will not regret it. I'm sure you will be rewarded by the excellent presentations that we are going to hear, because we have very eminent speakers in their own fields. And then we can look forward to some very interesting discussion also. So as has been mentioned, 15 minutes. I will give you an indication after 13 minutes so that you have 2 minutes to wrap up. But I would very much appreciate it if you could, all the speakers, could kindly maintain self-restraint and show so that you are able to conclude your presentations within 15 minutes and don't go over that period. So, Madam Dr. Bharti Chibber, the floor is yours. I unfortunately do not know your antecedents in terms of your connection with any educational institution. So I would request you to please share that also with the audience. And you said you're going to speak on the ASEAN. That is a very important area, not only in terms of what is happening in the South China Sea, but as far as India's foreign policy is concerned, when we had the Look East in 1992 and we had the Act East in 2014. So, Madam, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ambassador. And it's always a pleasure to be here with NICE. And of course, I also thank Dr. Jaiswal for inviting me here to share my views. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Bharti Chibber, and I'm teaching political science in the University of Delhi for almost 16 years now, and international relations, India's foreign policy, with special reference to Southeast Asia and Indo-Pacific, is one of my primary areas of research. So with that, of course, as I'll be speaking on India-ASEAN relations and the emerging contours of security in the post-pandemic Indo-Pacific region, I'll be talking about very briefly, due to the paucity of time, the main highlights, the main points, and I'll be cutting short my paper, which will be a kind of a brief trajectory of India-ASEAN relations to understand the contemporary dimensions of their relation and ASEAN's Indo-Pacific policy, because that's very critical in understanding convergences and divergences in India, ASEAN, Indo-Pacific policy in India, Indo-Pacific region. And finally, how can we have more opportunities to collaborate in the region? Why Indo-Pacific? Because even before this current pandemic, we saw that there have been movement towards geopolitical shifts in the Indo-Pacific regions with many regional actors, middle powers, even extra-regional actors playing a critical role in the rising contours of regional security architecture in the Indo-Pacific region. And with China's aggressive posture, along with regional cooperation initiatives. So, of course, we'll have to wait and see how the future unfolds, but definitely Indo-Pacific region is very critical in the current dynamics and the near future. Coming to India-ASEAN relation, well, of course, we have a long history right after independence, if we take after independence period, but owing to the Cold War politics, we could not develop very close relation, and it was in 1990s with many changes in international relations, both domestic and international factors, including India's economic liberalization, end of Cold War, disintegration of Soviet Union, China's, of course, increased assertiveness in East Asia and South China Sea, and of course, ASEAN's own success as a regional organization. It actually drew our attention more towards Southeast Asia, which finally culminated in Look East policy. At the same time, ASEAN was also attracted to India because of our markets, our liberalization policy, and also because it saw India as a kind of a balancer to Chinese domination, along with India being the biggest, with the biggest naval forces in the Indian Ocean with nuclear capabilities. ASEAN also saw an ally in us. And we moved from a dialogue partner in 1992 to a full dialogue partner in 1996 to our relationship being institutionalized in 2002. We have functional cooperation in diverse areas and a strategic partnership. And in 1997, when Myanmar joined ASEAN, then we also came to share a long adjoining land border with ASEAN, which added a strategic dimension to our relations in addition to the huge economic potential. And the relations moved on, it fructified in some areas, But during this period, probably there were two major grounds um, which affected India-ASEAN relation. One probably was the delay in the implementation of certain projects, and secondly, perhaps overlapping of management of certain issues by different departments. And when Prime Minister Narendra Modi took helms, he took he took charge of the affairs, then India adopted a much more proactive policy, which culminated from look east to act east policy, and based on three C's, three pillars of culture, connectivity, India actually moved towards much more closer with ASEAN. Of course, we do have a free trade agreement, which of course may require certain modifications. There have been still certain issues in terms of connectivity and also in terms of non-fructifying of additional comprehensive economic partnership. But yes, in spite of that, India-ASEAN relations have moved on and have fructified with a more regenerated kind of an active policy. When we come to the whole idea of Indo-Pacific region and in terms of ASEAN's outlook towards the Indo-Pacific, then in 2019 they came up with their own outlook in terms of their vision of an Indo-Pacific region, and it spoke about, of course, cooperation, integration, but also spoke about centrality of ASEAN in the Indo-Pacific region. And the centrality was not in terms of geography, but rather in terms of management of affairs, because you can see different organizations, ARF or APEC, all these organizations or the dialogue partners, they have ASEAN as a central organization. So ASEAN's centrality was a main element of ASEAN's Indo-Pacific vision or their outlook. And well, there have been some criticism of this outlook because they spoke about inclusive Indo-Pacific region rather than a free and open Indo-Pacific region, which was more an American vision. And probably the reason could be because some of the countries, including Indonesia and probably Malaysia, they had China as also one of the countries to be included in this vision. However, when you look at ASEAN history, then we see that their whole notion of ASEAN has always been about confidence building, about consensus. So from that point, we see that then they have been consistent in their approach. And another issue was about the Quad, because Quad had United States, Japan, Australia, and India, which were outside powers when ASEAN saw them in terms of playing a critical role in Indo-Pacific region. So there were certain divergences which were there. Initially, the whole notion of ASEAN's approach to the Indo-Pacific region. However, now if we analyze these divergences or we have a look at India-ASEAN relations in Indo-Pacific, then we realize that much before the pandemic, way back in 2019, in the last summit, in 2019 summit between India and ASEAN, ASEAN has actually accepted India's rising role in Indo-Pacific region in terms of because both the ASEAN and India, of course, with their GDP of more than 5 trillion US dollar and the huge population, they can play in the markets, of course, very critical role together in Indo-Pacific region. And also there were other issues of convergence in terms of cross-border terrorism, maritime security, and of course the situation in South China Sea. And if we, in spite of certain divergence in terms of ASEAN, within ASEAN itself, in terms of India's role as a balancer towards China, we also see that ASEAN also looks at India in terms of a security provider. In the Indian Ocean or the South China Sea or even in the Indo-Pacific region, not only as a balancer. And when you say security provider, it does not only mean that India has to be there always, but as a kind of a regional partner, where ASEAN can look up to when it faces, or as it continues faces aggression from China, whether it's Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, or even the Quad countries like Australia. So that's another critical element. And then again, India also accepted in the summit also, India has accepted the ASEAN Indo-Pacific outlook, because our Act East policy is a very critical element of our foreign policy, and of course it goes beyond ASEAN in terms of involving the other Indo-Pacific actors. But ASEAN is still a central element of our Act East policy. So centrality of ASEAN in the Indo-Pacific region is very much accepted by India, and also the issues of physical and digital connectivity, all in terms of increasing people-to-people connectivity, trade and tourism were also taken care with a lot of initiatives like USD 1 billion line of credit that was initiated in 2019. And even in the present contours, if we look at India-ASEAN relations, then of course some of the countries being more sensitive to China, what we see in the present virtual diplomacy that is held in terms of COVID, due to the COVID crisis, there have been many convergences in terms of health. A very recent Indonesian embassy has released a very recent um, kind of a pamphlet, or acceptance, where India was called a pharmacy of the world because of not only its medicines in terms of allopathy, but our Ayurveda and other medicines. So that's a kind of an acceptance of ASEAN-India relations going beyond economics, and also in terms of strategic and other health initiatives. And when it comes to Quad, which is a very important actor in terms of Indo-Pacific region, now with Quad plus the virtual diplomacy involving South Korea and Vietnam, one of the major important countries of the ASEAN, presently taking lead in the ASEAN vision. So with that, Quad has also moved beyond the so-called, as ASEAN initially felt, probably for external powers, So now it has come very near to their own home, So again, we can see that there's further convergence. And the latest summit, which was held in 2020, June, the virtual summit, it said that India, ASEAN will cooperate, and in terms of cooperation, dialogue, and trust building in the Indo-Pacific region. So again, we can see there's a further convergence. Apart from that, ASEAN has also believed in the promotion of the regional frameworks. In addition to our Act East policy, the Sagar initiative, that is the security and growth for all
Dr.
in the
Chibber,
region. Yeah, I'll be
2
winding up
minutes
in
more.
2 minutes.
Yeah, sure,
Yes,
sure.
sure.
Thank you.
I'll be doing that. Thank you. So yeah, so basically with that whole notion of an open global initiative, India and ASEAN are moving further closer, I would say, and going beyond the strategic partnership from South China Sea to the Indo-Pacific region, which is a much wider region. And also recently, again, ASEAN invited, along with the other countries, Australia and other countries, to reinitiate the dialogue on the regional comprehensive economic partnership, which probably also coincided with the American proposal of expansion of G7 to G11, and also the Quadrilateral Alliance. So that actually highlights, that the geopolitical changes in the Indo-Pacific region are actually affecting and providing opportunity for India, ASEAN to collaborate further. And India now being a non-permanent member, also as part of WHO, with being a host in 2021 of BRICS Summit, is definitely going to be a very important actor in the Indo-Pacific region. And finally, I would wind up with concluding that, well, India and ASEAN have a lot of commonality in terms of Indo-Pacific region, in terms of ASEAN seeing India not only as a balancer vis-a-vis China, but also, as I said, a security provider, and a country in terms of which is collaborating presently, which is seen in a very high, which is given a very high value in terms of human concerns also, in addition to strategic and the military and the economic affairs, by all the powers, middle powers and the rising powers. And finally, I would say that with national, in terms of being self-reliance, that is being promoted because of the, which has got fillip because of the COVID crisis. I think the future is also of regionalism, in terms of regional integration, in terms of multilateralism. So I think Quad and ASEAN can work together in the Indo-Pacific region, and this partnership may take some time to fructify, but if it does, then it can be indispensable for changing the whole scenario in terms of a hierarchical world order, in terms of a new world order with middle powers playing a very critical role in the evolving security architecture in Indo-Pacific. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chibber. And your last comment is very valid and relevant, that middle powers could come together and try to play a more significant role as far as the region is concerned. My congratulations to you for a very comprehensive presentation. Just in 15 minutes, you have covered this whole gamut of relations between India and ASEAN. I will pose one or two questions to you, not to be answered now, but to be answered at the end of, when all the presentations have been made, so that you can please have a, give it a thought also, mull it over. One is you mentioned about the Quad and the Quad Plus in the context of the COVID-19. But as regular formal members of Quad, do you think countries like Vietnam or Indonesia or some others in the ASEAN might be interested to join going forward? Secondly, you have said that ASEAN looks upon India as a balancer to China and also as a security provider. Has India's role in that context, has ASEAN been satisfied? Has ASEAN been happy, or would they like us to do more? And third one is, as far as RCEP is concerned, India's move out of RCEP last November in Bangkok, how are they reacting? Meaning, I hear that they are still keen that India should reconsider, India should join, etc. But then I think just making statements is not enough, because India did not join for a variety of reasons. China was one, but the other was that issues of our concern, whether it is movement of professionals or skilled workers, that was really not taken on board by any of the countries. And you know what has been the status of India-ASEAN FTA in trade in goods. So we want to expand it to services and investment, and that we were not getting any meaningful response from the ASEAN, let alone the others. So your comment on that also, if you could, at the end of the session. So now we have my good friend, Dr. Nanda Kishore, MS. He's Associate Professor, Department of Geopolitics and International Relations, Manipal Academy of Higher Education. And he will speak on democracy, leaders, and governance in the post-pandemic world order. Nanda Kishore, you have the floor. 15 minutes again, and I will give you a sound out in 13 minutes. Thank you.
Sure, sir. Thank you, Ambassador, and nice to see you here again after a couple of our meetings, one in Manipal and then in Mumbai. It's always a pleasure to have you on board. Thanks to Dr. Pramod Jaiswal and his whole team for having involved us in such a humongous conference. It's sort of a festival. It's an international relations festival. Nevertheless, the topic that I've chosen today was already...
Nanda Kishore, when I wrote
yes,
to Pramod Jaiswal, I told him it is a Mahakumbh of international relations.
Absolutely, sir. No doubt about it. No second thought about it. And the consistency that he has been following in terms of whether it's on China or any other, constantly he's been organizing. He's also equally giving importance to the youngsters. Now, by saying these words, I also take an extra minute from Pramod Jaiswal, because I have spoken good of his organization and all of us. for ourselves. Nevertheless, directly getting into the subject, why I specifically chose is because it looked very interesting for me, because the type of transformations that were happening with the pandemic scenario. Because I'm specifically not using post-COVID, because COVID may not go at all. So we assume that it may be pandemic. That's my submission. So post-pandemic, I'm trying to analyze from the pandemic scenario how it would pan out and how it happens. So there are three levels in which leadership actually invariably comes in. The arguments that I make in between, I'm not making a specific or a complete analysis on the leaders, but the nations that they are leading. So one has to draw inferences from that one. So the analysis is actually at different levels that I would take. I would initially talk about the levels of analysis, subsequently look at the democracy, and then look at governance. And these three components I would try bringing in. It's very interesting to see, long ago, Thucydides, a Greek historian, while writing about the Peloponnesian War, he very clearly wrote about the defeat that happened for the Athens and its democratic polity and the way culture ended. He says it did not just happen because of the war alone. He says it was the plague that destroyed or devastated the Athenians. Of something around 100,000 people were killed between 430 BC to 427 BC, where he says that some sort of a selfishness, lawlessness, extravagance, neglect of the poor, immoral life, all these were also contributing factors to, or the causal factors to, what we talk about the pandemic itself, and then subsequent destruction of the Athens. Now, why I'm trying to bring this here in terms of argument is very simple, because when we look at the post-pandemic world order, it is not to be looked in isolation. So when I say levels of analysis, I'm looking at the local, national, and then the global level, at the international system level. Now, when I say individual level, that is local, when I say it has affected individual leaders, advisors, individual governments, essentially the private sector, which is a greater booster of economy to everything, that the backbone of the system, even they have been put into a sort of difficult scenario. So because at the end of the day, behavior of a state also depends on this level, because here at this level, it is a reflection even on the leaders, because as leaders are also included, the leader's psyche, the leader's way of leading. Like in our case, with regard to India, the Prime Minister gave an analogy that the Mahabharata was fought for 18 days. Here is a case we will take 21 days. He was extremely optimistic about it, and he also thought the way Indians, for the first time, at least since I'm born, for the first time I saw the type of conduct that the Indians did during the lockdown, except for aberrations there here, but to a country of this sort, which is generally seen as chaotic, the discipline that was displayed and the respect that was given to the leader's voice and the way he dealt with it was phenomenal. But unfortunately, after the 4th of May, the way things turned out to be something else. So that must have even pushed the leader of the nation to a particular level. So in that level of analysis, it has also affected massively. So that would be reflective in the post-pandemic order, how he's going to deal with it, because that would be haunting him in the back, how he had to go through in a particular time that he was pushed through. At the mid-level, that is the national level, where we can bring in state as well as the society into the picture, we have the public opinion that gets generated, economic opinion or economic conditions, political conditions, and the cultural conditions that are attributed to a particular state and society. Now, when I say this one, because at the national level, there are different types of voices that have come in different parts of the world. Those economies which weren't doing great, for them it has come as a savior, because they can always take rescue and say pandemic affected us, otherwise we already had a plan and we would have done a different type of a work, but that unfortunately hasn't happened, for precise reason that it shut us completely down and we did not have an option to do anything. So we were tied up is another level to look at how individualistic states have taken rescue at the mid-level to look at analysis. At the international level, again, when we go at the global level analysis, we have seen the type of relations that have been built between the states. There are states where things have been torn apart. They haven't been doing great. That is more of a case with United States and China. And even to an extent, there was a strain between Russia and China, and we saw a different type of communication that's happening. But at the same time, this has also given a scope for a lot of leaders to actually come together, build new alliances, build new organizations, build new friends or systems. That includes the latest one that's between UAE and Israel. And then we also see the distribution of power is also something that's happening, where many others are also rising at the domestic level, at the economic condition level, from the overall world GDP level. A lot of things have been changing, but nevertheless, none of these things have also stopped them to think about or come together. So here we are talking about relations between the states and citizens, then citizens and citizens. So three levels of analysis. When we look at the post-pandemic world order, seems to be heading to a particular one which may come up with, or immediately might not find some sort of a normalcy, is what I see. So when I talk about democracy, here is specifically what I'm talking about. There are different type of democracies that we come across. We have some of them who are called as sort of failing democracies. We have fragile democracies. We are having maturing democracies, mature democracies. And then finally, we have a category of non-democratic systems, but we're not talking about, because the effect on democracy is what we're talking. Those of them who are at some level partially exhibiting democratic culture, even they have been troubled. So we are seeing that in Belarus, and we are seeing that also in few other places. Now, interestingly, if we look in, there is some sort of a democratic backsliding that is happening in many of the places, because invariably those leaders and those states which had exhibited certain amount of, let's say, the electoral authoritarianism, because in a lot of places democracy has also been reduced to the level of being electoral democracy, not many other things which are also components of democracy, until and unless it's paid and looked after. So in that perspective, there are a lot of electoral authoritarian systems that have come in, electoral authoritarianism within a democratic system. So we see something like Turkey coming up in that way. There are a lot of who accuse even India of that one, which I don't completely subscribe to. But at the same time, there are many others where have happened. And there are these democracies which are, as I mentioned, backsliding, and they have some of them trying to use this as an opportunity to control. That is something very clearly coming in, because we also have, on the other hand, repressive authoritarianism, which we used to use as an example that how they differ from the democratic system. But unfortunately, in democracy, certain components have come in, because that leads to democracy. When we say it's a mirror side of the component of governance. Now, being democracy alone does not qualify a state to be a welfare state. So there are different components that are part of this in governance. When we say governance, it has components of transparency, it has to be accountable, it has a rule of law, it has to be responsive, it has to be equitable and inclusive, it also has to be consensus oriented. So when we bring all these things together, somewhere we will see there is some sort of a disparaging effect that has been there on democracies, at least during the pandemic, because it has brought in some amount of disorientation. It has also given them a reason to undemocratically use the system, undemocratically use the governmental systems to function, where we say it be surveillance, or for that matter, let's say they have tried using this as part of their propaganda, or silently trying to push across a lot of accords and many other things, which probably in times to come we will only come to know, because the changes are at three levels, as I mentioned: social, economic, and political changes. Now, all these three components, if we look in, what they essentially bring out is an idea where none of them or none of the leaders are ready to agree with each other, where we look at them from the power perspective. But if we see things that are bringing them to sympathize with each other, emphatically coming together, are different things. So there is a power play that is happening, where you see some of the leaders who did not exhibit any component of democracy or democratic ideals are actually trying to look at by thinking, if not now, when the things are not going great. Let's say the states in West Asia, states in Middle East, those are the ones who actually are not doing great at this juncture, but they were authoritarian states. But now they are not trying to go extra authoritarian, but they are trying to look a place where they can still try to convince the people, saying that they are still looking for the people, or they are trying to take care of the welfare of the people. They are not just being authoritarian. So they are seeing this as an opportunity to interact, and they are toning down to an extent. Whereas on the other hand, you see the democratic states are becoming much more stringent, because they are not completely held accountable and responsible for a lot of things. So they see this as a vent out for them to pull or push themselves, or push certain of their ideas to say this is what they wanted to. Otherwise, which would have pushed them to sort of deliberative democracy, where you need to go through a lot of processes, because in democracy, more than the end, it's the means that matters, because the means has to be convincing, means has to be through deliberative component, and it also has to come through consensus building. Now that process has been partially evaporated, or that process has been compromised, so where they are able to take things forward in a different way. So you see the United States president, let's say on a normal time, he would have not been in a position to take take certain measures the way he is taking now, like for that matter, even for that matter, India. Now, in other times, even the opposition parties, everybody would have come together and made things much more problematic for the government with regard to what happened in the Galwan Valley, and then subsequent discussions that we have been having. But within no time, the government just came up with an order where it simply said that I'm banning 59 odd apps from China. This would not have happened on normal times. This would not have resulted in normal times, but that happened at an ease, because the deliberative democracy component is comparatively low now. So you don't need to move through lot of processes, and you don't need to explain everything to everyone. You have taken certain decisions, you are trying to put that across. So from that perspective, if you look in, it's not just here in the world order that is happening. We look at the way things happen with regards to Duterte in Philippines, the way he has taken things forward. Hungary seems to be another victim of the pandemic itself, where their prime minister, that is Viktor Orban, who thought this is the best time that he should take till the expiry date of himself, he would take things forward. It has also saved, and it has also put into trouble some of the leaders like Netanyahu.
Netanyahu, 2 minutes more.
Yes, sir. So Netanyahu was someone who was troubled with his own handling of COVID-19, and now something has worked out for him, and he has come out of that one. So what we are trying to say is unprecedented sort of relations that are emerging. Leaders are able to talk, and a lot of them are able to come together to talk certain things which in normal times would not have happened. Now, the deep resentment against some sort of unfair assignment of equality that has come through this pandemic will certainly reflect, and it will also come out in one or the other form, because a lot of governments which were democratic have also turned out to be comparatively autocratic in their functioning, where the functioning of the government system wasn't transparent functioning of the government system, because every day you would have different lockdown system, different lockdown statements. This is across the world, not in one or the other places. Everywhere this came in one or the other form. So while we wait to see the end of this particular pandemic, we can only hope that the crisis would not be some sort of an exordium in the rise of more dictatorships and less democratic systems, if not authoritarian systems, but will somehow unflag democracies in one or the other way, and democracies will sustain even after a pandemic of a different sort that was not experienced, at least in last 1 century. Thank you for your patient listening. I'll take a break here. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much, Dr. Nankishore. And you have raised a number of very valid points, and you've had a very broad canvas in terms of the presentation. So my compliments to you. Let me just pose 1 or 2 questions that you could also sort of, reflect upon at the end of our presentation. One, you have said, you've given an example You've given two examples. One is about the banning of 59 apps. Don't you think, you've given, of course, an example of India, but of course it would be applicable many other countries across a large segment in the region and otherwise, that China has put itself in a corner, that the whole world has really risen against it. So as far as India is concerned, and if you look at some of these polls also that have been conducted, people have been saying, more than 90% have been saying that we should cut our trade relations with China. So you mentioned 59 apps. My own perception of the assessment would be that the people want more, even more action. That why is the government going so slow? Why not sort of, banning Huawei? Why not banning ZTE? That sort of a thing. So if you could just reflect on it, that is it that this is something that would not really have, caused for, because at this time, standing up against anything that the government is doing would, be very difficult for any opposition party.
True.
You have seen that what is happening. The other is, you made this again point with respect to Prime Minister Modi, that, first 3 weeks when he announced the lockout on 24th of March, it was fine. But after that, the intensity or the manner in which it has been implemented. But that having been said, his personal popularity continues to soar, as we've seen in this India Today Mood of the Nation poll.
Yeah.
8%, notwithstanding China, notwithstanding pandemic, notwithstanding economics. So maybe a little bit on that. And the third point is that you have spoken about the greater power coming to the state, to the, which has made it somewhat more authoritarian. Don't you think that was required under the circumstances? Because you yourself have mentioned that after the first lockdown, things didn't really go all that well. So if in other countries also, I'm just taking example of India because you have mentioned, you have taken up these Indian cases, but in other places also, if the governments had not taken greater power in their own hands, would it not have been even more difficult for them to ensure things like wearing masks or social distancing or what have you? So these are a couple of the points that you might wish to reflect on at the end of our session.
Sure,
and
sir.
let me also make this point to all our participants that I see our chat box is empty. So any questions or any comments that people might have, please start putting them right away, because then we'll be able to have a good discussion with our panelists. So our next panelist is Dr. Sanjeev Humagen. He is visiting faculty, Nepal Open University in Nepal. And you, Dr. Humagen, would speak on pandemic power and alliance, why we need to focus on failure of G20 to predict the new era. So you have the floor, 15 minutes. I will also advise you after 13 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair and Mr. Ashok, sir. Thank you to organizations, and particularly to the Dr. Jaiswal, who is my good friend too. Congratulations, and I wish the great success of this conference. It is my great honor to have this wonderful discussion with you all. I hope our discussion will help us, mostly the Nepal and India, on identification of the nature and issue of the post-COVID era, so we can respond more quickly than other nations. I'll try to present some of the clues and evidences based on the theories of international relations, so we can answer some fundamental questions of the post-COVID era. Let me start my today's talk linking the two puzzles. I think the one just Professor Nanda Kishore has raised, and another is the G20 issue. The first one is the failure of the G20 puzzle. After the brief introduction of this, I will talk about the second puzzle, the recession of democracy puzzle. As we all know, the membership of the G20 consists of 19 individual countries plus the European Union. Collectively, G20 economics account around 90% of the gross world product, 80% of the world trade, and 2/3 of the world population. Though it was established in 1999, it became active from 2009 and 10 after the financial crisis of 2007 and 8. G20 leaders meet twice in a year in London and Petersburg in 2009 and Toronto and Seoul in 2010, and it was a time that G20 became active. G20 is particularly important for forum for we Asian, I think, because we could see the beginning of the era of the Asia from the G20. Among the 20 members, China, India, Japan, and Indonesia are the formal members, and ASEAN is the permanent guest invitee. We did not see such a strong forum where all Asian major powers were active. If you see the UN Security Council, there is only China. And if you see the G7 or G8, only Japan. So it was the first forum where all major Asian states at one time with other global power. So in that sense, G20 is, I think, was important for Asia too. But very unfortunately, the forum couldn't achieve the expected success. First, it failed to reform and democratize the governing institutions and organization of international economy. We often call it the international financial regulatory reform. So it was the main goal of the G20 after financial crisis to reform the international financial regulation, and it failed on that. Reform of the IMF, World Bank was the major agenda of the G20 after 2008 and 9. Its initial aim to create the stable global finance is still on a slow, gradual progress. Most importantly, it couldn't successfully replace the G7 and G8. We can see the G7 and G8 is still active and become more active now. Very unfortunately, it couldn't establish the adequate institutional infrastructure, nor a constant policy vision for the globally integrated financial system. Today, I'm more focused on the second dimension. This was the goal of the G20, the second dimension, which is pretty philosophical, I think. Indeed, the main goal to make the G20 active after 2009 and 10 was to overcome the financial crisis. It was the initial goal. It has achieved the partial success on this. In my opinion, however, there was another important goal to promote the strong multilateralism. I say strong because it must have two components. The first one is participatory. Rise of China and India has taken as a factor.
Okay, you're back.
And the latter as a pull factor. Indeed, there were some questions of the legitimacy of this forum. Robert White, an economist of the London School of Economy, has identified 4 issues raised on the legitimacy of the G20. First, the legitimacy of the process by which 20 were selected. Second, the lack of explicit criteria for membership. Third, principle of exclusive membership. And the fourth one is the thinness of the regional representation. Even we forgot these critics, there are more problems. Though the G20 is active, we are witnessing the declining of the multilateralism. I think this is the point, what we can expect in the post-COVID era too. Brexit, contemporary Sino-US relationship, stagnant peace process around the world, and dissatisfaction to the international organizations' effectiveness like WHO and WTO are few major examples to see the decline in the multilateralism. If you see only the series of the crises that EU is facing in the last decade, the Eurozone crisis, refugee problem, Brexit, and state-centric response in the Corona, I think we can say the EU and the whole multilateralism is in a crisis. On the other hand, the United Nations Security Council is incapable of addressing the crisis, and a politicized WHO is losing its credibility. Now, let me go to the second puzzle. In his recently published article, International Economics and Economic Policy, the German economist Paul Wolfans identified such phenomena as overlapping crisis dynamic. But I think rather than telling them this overlapping crisis dynamic, it will be better to separate the international and domestic political factors more deeply. We are living in an era of the democratic recession, as Professor just before tell. The major countries are having the problems. The middle countries are also having problems, or many of them are not democratic. And you can see the rising power are also the less democratic. And the fourth is that small countries are facing the crisis of studies of the crisis of democracy here. So if you summarize these two puzzles, I think even before the COVID, we were witnessing the decline of multilateralism and a crisis of the democracy. So if you say this in theoretically, we were in a realist era. So the international global order was more and more realistic and perspective. You can explain to the realism perspective. And most important issue is that the state of democracy of the majority of the great powers was getting poor on that time. So let's add some pandemic effects here now. The first question I want to talk is the power, the major keywords of my today's presentation. Well, our contemporary discussion are more focusing on whether who is the winner and loser of this pandemic, or the rivalry between the China and USA are the major concern. But I think it's time to put some new question in the table, which help us in the predicting the post-COVID era. Few of them are, first, what will be the impact of the COVID on defense budget of the major great powers? I think that's an important question we need to keep in mind. Does this pandemic is going to change the nature of power? So we will live continually in the power of the hard power era, or the soft power will be the important in the next COVID, post-COVID era. Is it going to change the priority of the major powers in international politics? What matter on the alliance in the post-COVID era? Do G2 are effective on their responsibility? And indeed, these are the important questions that we have been discussing in international relations from a long time. Given to the potential for the second and third wave of pandemic, it is still too early to ascertain to the result too. But I think we can observe some clear patterns of the change already we have during the last 9 months of this pandemic. The first one is that generally we examine the political change in post-pandemic era, focusing on two dimensions. As you all know, the first one is that whether the pandemic helps on the promotion of democracy or not. Historically, we have such evidence in Europe. After the pandemic, the European nations became more democratic, and the voice of the farmers and the other groups became increased in Europe too, get importance in Europe. There are several examples. And the balance of power, even the power from Europe to USA went because of the pandemic. So we can see the balance of power in the post-pandemic era. If we see on the G20 and the financial crisis that happens the 1.5 decades earlier, we have witnessed that the decline of democracy. Actually, the 2007-8 financial crisis was not supportive on the strengthening of democracy around the world. So this is, I think, one evidence point we can departure for to predict the post-COVID era. I think we are not going to have change on this. The issue of economy will be the dominant agenda for most countries. So it is hard to see we will enter to the more democratic globe. Mostly, there is not possibility that some country will lead this campaign. What is the difference between the Second World War and now is that after the Second World War, we have a leader of democracy. There were some groups believe that democracy is beneficial for them. But if you see from the beginning of this new millennium, particularly after the 2007-8 and financial crisis, it is very hard to find who is the leader of democracy here. You can see the US, or you can see the Britain, how they are suffering internally from the democratic process and accountability. So it is very hard to predict that we will have a better democratic world soon after the pandemic era. I think that's the one point we can already observe. And this is related with the second issue, the balance of power. The long agenda of the Democratic Alliance is in a crisis. Because if you see the balance of power after the Second World War, democracy was the key components, along with the hard power, has generated or lead these phenomena. But if the democracy is in crisis, democracy cannot be more anymore be such a strong components for the balance of power or create the alliances, I think. So I think this is the one important factor that we can see the rise of the new international order. So we are in change. We can see the another breakthrough, not only the democratic alliance or the value of the democracy in global order, the failure of the hard power in global responding in the COVID. I think that's the important point we need to look on also. Neither USA, nor EU, or nor China, or any other country were enough successfully responding this COVID globally. So all major states were state-centric and are still state-centric. They are slowly losing the legitimacy and keeping and strengthening the existing alliance. Even the US-Europe alliance is not safe now. So in that perspective, the alliance based on the hard power is also in the crisis. So the alliance based on the democracy and the alliance based on the hard power, I think, is in a crisis and will be more vulnerable in the post-COVID era because both are losing the legitimacy right now. In this sense, we can conclude that the alliance or enemy-based hard power and democracy will get threat in the post-pandemic era. But on the same time, however, we can observe another factor which make us to think that the status quo of this political order without any significant change, because it is increasingly difficult for any single country to exercise now. There is not a single country which can present a new roadmap in the post-COVID era. None of the country in the situation to increase the significant amount of the money in international organization and lead the speed recovery of this COVID-19, post-COVID-19 era. So I think there will not be any single country say, okay, guys, now come on here, we are ready to help you. So we cannot find such a big country in the post-COVID era. So we cannot say that we are going to have a big change, though the existing true values, democracy and hard power, are losing the legitimacy in the political order. But
2 minutes more, Dr.
Okay, sure. I need only 1 minute more now.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Status quo. So how we will then, what will be the next era, how we can predict? I think the first two things we need to focus is that the one is who will generate the next Keynes economy. After the crisis, which country will develop the most effective recovery plan? Or which country will present the most effective recovery economy will be the core for the next order. And if USA and China failed on that, and middle power were success on that, I think that will create the new political order. It will change the new world order. Otherwise, we will stay for a long transition phase, like democratic transition in many small countries around the world. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Magan, for your presentation. Again, it's been fascinating because both geographically as well as historically, you have covered a very wide area. Now, one or two questions for you also, because you mentioned that after the Second World War, there were a number of democracies which came on the scene. And post-pandemic, which is again a crisis of a similar nature, because what people are mentioning, what analysts and commentators are mentioning, that this is the biggest, most unprecedented crisis to have hit the world after the Second World War. So don't you think that one of the reasons could be that so many countries which were colonized, which were under the colonial domination of so many countries, and they became independent. So the first path for them was to go on the path of democracy, although we know that many countries, whether in South America or in Africa or even in Asia, They might have gone initially on the path of democracy, but very soon they came onto the path of autocracy, authoritarianism, and dictatorship. And then we also saw that after 1991, the disintegration and collapse of the Soviet Union, again, there was a move towards democratic revival, so to say. And right now, what we are seeing is because of the fact that power and authority of the state is increasing. So that is why one might feel that democracies are a little under stress. But your thoughts on that? The second aspect is you mentioned that the pandemic has adversely impacted upon the strategic and political relations between the United States and the European Union. Don't you think it had existed even before the pandemic? We know the G7 meeting that took place in Canada and how President Trump had moved out in a huff and so on and so forth. And lastly, G7 changed to G20 after the international economic crisis in 2007, 2008. And it was eminently successful because there was a leadership that the United States was able to provide, and all the other countries were willing to follow. Here, the United States has not been able to provide any leadership. So there's been a total lack of leadership, and what has been compounded is by the rivalry between an ascending power and the existing hegemon, so to say. And that is why, whether it is G20 or it is G7 or it is the UN Security Council, none of them has really been able to be successful in delivering proper results. So now we come to the last speaker, Dr. Gulbin Sultana. She's the research analyst at the Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis. And I'm delighted that you're speaking on the Maldivian economy. I think that is a subject that otherwise would not get focused on or would not get special treatment. But I'm so happy that you have chosen this subject. And I'm sure all of us are looking forward to being educated on this very important, though very little known issue. So Madam, you have the floor, 15 minutes, and I'll tell you after 13 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Am I audible?
Yes, fine.
Thank you, and good afternoon to all the viewers. First of all, I'd like to thank Dr. Pramod Jaiswal for providing me this platform to share my views. We have just heard three interesting presentations, and my previous speakers, particularly Dr. Nanda Kishore and Dr. Sanjeeva, talk about the impact of global pandemic on the political, social, security and economic affairs of the country. And basically their focus was on the big power and the middle powers. But I'm going to talk about the small states, particularly the small island developing states. This global pandemic has impacted all the countries, particularly the big, small, developing. All the countries have felt the economic pressure due to this pandemic situation. But I think the small island developing countries, or particularly the countries which are completely dependent on tourism sector and on import for their food security or the supply of raw material, are the worst affected country. And Maldives is one of such country in South Asian region. Maldives is the smallest country in the South Asian region in terms of population. It's completely dependent on tourism sector. 2/3 of its revenue come from tourism sector. There are other sectors like construction, fishing, then transport, communication. These sectors do contribute in the growth of Maldives economy, but tourism is the mainstay of Maldivian economy. In 2019, Maldives received around 1.5 million tourists. There were a surge in the tourism sector, and I think it contributed significantly in the growth of country's economy, in the GDP, and also in improved its national reserve. So given this positive development, this year, Maldives Monetary Authority projected a positive outlook for Maldives economy. It was expected that the surge in tourism sector will increase the GDP by at least 7.5% in 2020. It was also expected the government's target to receive around 2 billion tourists by the end of 2020. And Maldives is having its debt burden. They have to repay a huge debt. So it was expected that this year, 2020, the debt to GDP ratio will be a positive one, in the sense that debt will be lower in compared to the GDP in 2020. But unfortunately, I think this positive scenario, got shifted due to this COVID-19 situation. In the month of March, there was spread of virus in Maldives, and as a precautionary measure to contain the spread of virus, government had to take certain measures, which they announced a complete lockdown and closed the border, and this significantly impacted on the tourism sector. Now, like tourism from I think March 27, government announced that there will be the border will be closed, and from April, from the month of March, particularly April, May, and June, not a single tourist visited the country. As a result, no revenue was earned from tourism sector. Due to the lockdown, even other economic activities got disrupted. There was no export of raw fish. As a result, there was not much revenue was earned from the fishery sector as well. As a result, the revenue collection was much less in from like particularly from March to till now. At the same time, when the country was not earning much revenue, the state expenditure increased significantly, because to prevent and control the spread of virus, government had to take certain measures. It had to spend a huge investment in the health sector. Other than that, government had to provide economic relief to the packages, because a large chunk of the population is dependent on tourism sector directly or indirectly. There was lockdown in the country, so people were suffering economically. So government provided economic relief to the people. The government decided that during the lockdown period, there will not be any cut in the salaries. There should not be any food crisis in the country, because Maldives is completely dependent on import for its food requirement. And it was also decided that the small and medium enterprises, the fishermen, and the people who have lost jobs, they will be provided a relief package from government side. So around, I think, 2.7 billion Maldivian rupiah worth relief package, stimulus package was announced by the government. So on the one hand, there was no revenue collection, and on the other, there was a significant increase in the state expenditure. As a result, a government had to face a severe challenge. And another issue was, as I talked about, that repayment of debt is an issue for Maldivian government, and government tourism is the main source of its foreign exchange. But as a result, there was not much reserve. It impacted the national reserve, and government find it a challenge to repay that debt. So it's still a challenge. Government has now finally opened the border. I think 15 July the border was open, and from 15 July till now they have received more than 5,000 tourists. But then it's much less. It is expected that by the end of this year they'll be receiving around 120,000 tourists. And if the situation gets better, probably they might receive 5 lakh tourists, but even then the number is much less compared to the previous years, and by no means they are going to revive this sector to the level of pre-COVID-19 situation. So government is going to have a severe challenge, economic challenge. Maldivian government is looking for international assistance from the bilateral partners, countries like India, China, US, all the bilateral partners, and also multilateral institutes like World Bank, IMF, all these multilateral institutes. While the partners, they have committed that they would provide assistance, but even then, it will not be easy. It's a major challenge. So government is, at the domestic level also, Maldivian government is taking certain measures. For example, the various ministries and departments, they are initiating austerity measures. Uh, but from the pandemic, this global pandemic, I think several issues came up. It was very much clear that Maldives is vulnerable to external shock. Uh, but other than that, I think several other issues, several other gaps or vulnerabilities in the Maldivian system or Maldivian economy came up. And very quickly, I would like to just highlight those issues. First issue, that is a realization that Maldives is dependent, too much dependent on only one sector for its revenue, that is tourism sector. It is, I think that need was felt that something needs to be done to diversify diversify the source for revenue collection. But then Maldives, because of its geographic structure, because of its resources and capability, I think it will not be very easy to diversify diversify the economy or the source of revenue collection. The next point, next issue which came up during this pandemic was it is felt that government need to enhance its self-reliance. Government, Maldives is too much dependent on import for its food security, and also also the shipping sector. I mean, despite being an island nation and it's dependent on import, it depends on maritime domain. Still, it doesn't have an effective shipping. I think there was no domestic national shipping for the Maldives. Only in the March they have started now. So the need was felt that they need to improve on this aspect. And also it was felt that instead of 100% depending on the import for providing foods to its population, Maldives needs to do something. Efforts need to be initiated to grow food domestically, even if at least it can meet 50% its food requirement can earn from at the domestic level. The third point, I think another issue which came up during the pandemic is that lack of Maldivian local population participation in the tourism sector. The tourism sector mostly dependent on the foreign expatriate laborers. More than, I think, 1.5 lakh foreign expatriates are there in the Maldives. And then I think more than 64,000 people, foreign workers there are undocumented foreign workers. And during the pandemic, particularly these foreign undocumented workers were a main burden for the Maldivian government, not only economic burden, but also there were security issues related to these undocumented workers. So that talk is also going on now, Maldives media, and many people are talking about that. Probably there is a time, the time has come that Maldivian local population should be absorbed in the tourism sector, and more Maldivians should come. And this leads to my fourth point, that is the vulnerability of women, Maldivian women, which came up during this pandemic situation. The literacy rate, literacy rate among the Maldivian women is quite high, but then compared to their high literacy rate, the women participation in the workforce is quite negligible. Most of the women who work
Dr. Sultana, 2 minutes more to go, please.
Yes, I'll just finish. So most of the women, they are in the informal sector. And I think, as I mentioned, government provided economic relief package to the people who have lost job. But during this pandemic situation, many women folk could not avail those opportunities because they are working in the informal sector, not in the formal sector. So I think and there are several reasons why women in the Maldives are not there in the not contributing much in the women workforce or in the formal sector. So that mindset needs to be changed, and women need to be encouraged to be part in the workforce. So there are several changes are coming up. These are the vulnerabilities. Now this current government, President Soli, they came up with a strategic action plan to improve socio-economic development in, I think, 2019. The plan was for 2019 to 2023, but that plan was formulated much before the pre-COVID-19 situation. So many of the gaps and vulnerabilities which came during the pandemic situation, now government probably needs to incorporate those, must think about, identify those vulnerabilities also, and incorporate measures to address those challenges, because it's going to be a long-term, they need to see the problem from long-term perspective. Just reviving tourism sector is not going to help. They need to have a holistic approach. They need to be prepared for this kind of disaster or pandemic. So with this, I'll stop my presentation here, and I'll look forward for questions and comments. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much, Dr. Sultana, for this very comprehensive presentation. Just one or two very brief comments, questions. One is, you mentioned that there has been a lot of pressure on the Maldivian government to pay its debts. Now, one of the decisions in the meeting of the G20 that took place on the 26th of March, if I remember correctly, one of the decisions was to waive off the debts of developing countries. So has that really become effective as far as Maldives is concerned? And then I think there were some reports where Maldives was required to pay, I think, about $800 million to China, and it had asked India for some help in this regard. So if you could please share any information that you might have on this. And the last would be that, you know, when you're talking about diversification and training, then is there something happening? Because India, under its various programs, you know, like the Indian Technological and Economic Cooperation Program and so many other scholarships, particularly as far as the neighbors are concerned. I know Myanmar, Bangladesh, even in ASEAN, the LCMV countries, we have been sort of, you know, going out in a big way. So is that happening also in the case of Maldives? So maybe if you could share some thoughts. So friends, now we have come to the end of the presentations. Our chat box is still empty, but there is still time for people who might have, you know, some comments or questions to this excellent 4 presentations that have been made. My compliments to all the presenters. And if you could go very quickly, I know that the participants as well as the panelists must be, you know, their lunch is also heavily delayed. So let us not stand so much between them. But I know that I have posed a few, made a few remarks, posed a few questions. So if I could start from you, Dr. Bharti Chibber, if you would be good enough to very briefly share some thoughts on some of the questions or anything else that you might wish to add, which you think you might not have been able to mention when you were making your initial presentation. So maybe if we can put it to about 2-3 minutes per panelist. So that will give us about, with 4 panelists, about 12 minutes. And we should be able to go up to, now it is 2:25, so 2:35, 2:40. We should be able to wrap it up. Yes, madam, floor is yours. If you could kindly unmute. You could please unmute, or maybe the organizers need to unmute Dr. Bharti Chibber.
I have unmuted her, sir. I have asked her to unmute.
Okay, good, good. The red icon is gone.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, fine. Thank you so much, Ambassador, for those very pertinent questions. And There were three important observations. One was on Quad Plus, whether in normal times Vietnam would like to be actually joining Quad. Well, I think under normal circumstances, definitely if Vietnam or any other Southeast Asian or Indo-Pacific country, in addition to the four original members, they join Quad, it will remove the tag of being external powers. However, it actually depends how the things fructify, because if Vietnam would not like to join an organization which is focused and which is seen as anti-China, China being a powerful neighbor, and if it comes across as a military alliance against China, then definitely again it will not like to be a member of Quad in the normal circumstances. But however, because Quad hopefully will be being, as I was saying, being middle powers. Quad and ASEAN and other countries can play a very critical role in Indo-Pacific. Then probably if Quad does not only seem to be a military alliance, rather if it works in different other areas like economic cooperation for that matter, then probably it will be a good idea to have Southeast Asian countries as members, because they have been facing China being an aggressive in terms of South China Sea and other issues. The second question was on the balancer. Yes, I think I completely agree with you that ASEAN feels that India is a balancer and it can be a balancer and a regional security provider. However, it feels that India has much more to do in terms of being more proactive, play a very critical leading role in the region, because of course the smaller states, they see India's growing influence can be a counter as to China, and the larger states like Indonesia and all, they feel that India can be an attractive engine for regional growth of ASEAN also as a region. One of course being a credible strategic partner, India, of course, and India and ASEAN have to further have economic cooperation. There has to be trade, credible trade. Which needs further advancement. In addition to that, maritime security dimension, which has been neglected for a very long time by India, and for the last couple of years, we have actually started stressing on it and actually taking interest and working on our maritime security. So that's another area where India needs to show which can act as a true security provider in terms of maritime security. And the third area is the connectivity. Well, we have the trilateral highway which we plan to extend to Laos and all. But however, the slow movement of connectivity projects, that's another area where India needs to work on to be a really credible regional partner, also, as I said, security provider. And third question was on regional comprehensive economic partnership. Well, of course, ASEAN and other countries of the ASEP they want India to be part of it being a market and also a rising power, good middle power. But yes, India has its own reasons for not to be a part in the same form unless until those things are resolved. One was, of course, the agriculture protection and the other sectors, even in the steel, other sectors, the industrial sectors also. And also our Make in India initiative, the kind of the flooding that was happening of our markets by the Chinese products. And in 2018, they even tried to route their products through Hong Kong, so that doesn't seem to be enhancing the trade deficit that we have with China. So all these issues, they need to be taken care of. Also, we have our trade deficit with ASEAN also. So in terms of increasing that, in terms of increasing our access, and also, as you correctly mentioned about the service sector, we do have in trade pact in the free trade area, pact in the area of goods, but not in the services. So I mean, which took a lot of time, but which needs to fructify. So I think these are some of the areas, unless and until these are resolved, equitable market access and dispute settlement mechanisms are domestic industries which need certain protection, and of course the balance of trade situation. So all these things, they need to be these reservation that India had in terms of protecting our vulnerable population. So these are resolved. So obviously India in the present form will not be joining the ASEP. Though of course, if the things, if India gets a better deal, then being part of ASEP can be helpful in terms of being not excluded from the regional supply chain mechanism, and also as part of the growing, of course, Make in India is very great initiative, Skill India, Make in India, and other initiatives, but also being part of the regional economic architecture. Thank you.
No, absolutely. Thank you very much for these comments. And as you, to your last comment, what you have said, when India wants to say that it wants to become Atmanirbhar, then it is not that it wants to become self-reliant in that sense, but it wants to enhance its exports. And if it wants to enhance its exports, it needs preferential access to foreign markets. So that, of course, is there. Now, very quick comments on what you have mentioned, Dr. Chibar, and we will not, just for you to reflect upon, we will not continue our conversation because there's no time. One is when you mentioned about Vietnam joining, so it is a local power being there. But, if we are talking about Quad as a sort of a subset of Indo-Pacific, then, and not only of South China Sea or ASEAN, then of course, all the partners there, Quad, whether it is Japan or Australia or India or US, they are all a part of the Indo-Pacific. So, in that sense, there is no externality for any of these partners. If we limit it only to ASEAN and to South China Sea, then of course you can say that this is what it is. Second point is that I don't think Quad has really made any move towards being a military outfit or a security architecture. So far, even Quad Plus, as you mentioned yourself with Republic of Korea, New Zealand and Vietnam, it's only to discuss COVID-19. How it evolves in future, meaning as you know better than anyone else that it is still work in progress. How it develops in terms of building infrastructure, resilient infrastructure, etc. Now, in terms of India being more proactive, again, I take your point, but then we would also like to see in South China Sea, ASEAN itself being more proactive. As you said yourself, Vietnam does not want to sort of, rub China the wrong way. And Vietnam, its fishing boats have been sunk by Chinese Navy or Chinese Coast Guards. Malaysia has also suffered, Indonesia has also suffered, Philippines. So unless they are willing to stand up and develop a spine, it doesn't really give confidence. Like right now, the United States is coming in, but none of them is really willing to stand up and take
shoulder the responsibility.
Yeah, so let me leave it at that. I'm sure there'll be other opportunities when we can get together and have a longer discussion on this.
It will be my pleasure, Ambassador.
Thank you very much. We'll be in touch. I will take it forward as we go along.
Sure.
Dr. Nandakishore, now I come to you for your comments and remarks on some of the questions. Now I see that suddenly the chat box has also become active. So maybe you can respond to the question that I had posed to you, and then we can, I'll have a look at these questions also in the chat.
Yes, sir. First, I'll probably answer some of the comments that, or some comments that you had made. Yes, indeed, no doubt, even midst of the whole pandemic, there was this whole report that was carried out by India Today and all that. I agree completely with that one, no doubt about it. Again, what I'm trying to say is simply here, one, for a what do you say, the country of this size, I don't know what was exactly their sampling method, how it went. Second, there seems to be an acceptance to his leadership, but that is not the same thing in commensurate with his whole cabinet. I think what they say is that he is hardworking, he wants to do, he wants to deliver, but unfortunately, he doesn't have that sort of a great team that can actually go hand in hand with him. So it's like that of sort of a scenario where they have appreciation for him individually at all level. They think that he's not corrupt, he's not this thing, he's not someone who's trying to make money. But at the same time, they also think that what's exactly happening with the economy, what's exactly happening with many other things is a question that continues to remain. Yes, his popularity is perhaps the only thing that has survived in the whole pandemic, I think so, because he is someone who's constantly been able to come and talk, he's able to come and still do certain things, and to an extent there here things have also worked out for him, because there is something inherently strong in this nation, that people can bounce back in whatever the conditions are, whatever the criterias are. We were ruled by different people for thousands of years, yet we have remained as a civilizational state. So I certainly consider that part of it. But at the same time, as you also mentioned, the other one where even the democratic states were invariably forced, because people were utilizing their democracy in New York and other places. They even went on a protest saying that we will not wear masks. And it's a scenario where they are not going to just harm themselves, but they harm others. That's the biggest problem, that the state had to think at different levels. While respecting the individual liberty, they were also responsible to the larger group, especially of the whole nation, keeping that in mind. I think it came in, but keeping that in mind, but I'm also trying to say that a lot of them have also used this as an opportunity to push for a lot of things that might not have happened in a normal time. In the sense, we were talking about the Chinese apps and other things. For this, probably before the government would have arrived at a decision, these things would have gone through the parliament, and then it would have created a different level of debate. At least it would have delayed. That's what I was trying to talk about as a deliberative democracy, but at least that they could surpass. Because what happens is, on issues of national security and sensibilities, if the opposition tries doing anything, they know the outcome of it. Already they are not even closer to the league anywhere. And what would be real outcome of that one is very clearly seen in this particular scenario. So I completely agree with you on that one. I think I have another question that
You have
been asked
another
me.
question, yes. If you
Yes,
could
it
take
asks,
it very quickly.
will democratic backsliding continue to happen, or will there be a response from the civil society? I think this is certainly a challenge, because on the one hand, democratic backsliding may continue to happen, but it can happen till an extent. I think then the civil society will respond to it. Civil society will pitch in. I think that's the best thing that we can always see. Even some of those places, I was giving an example of Belarus, where we have seen that though the leader had stayed for a long time and there was none to question him, and in all that scenario, the civil society responded in a particular manner. Now they have someone who went during the Chernobyl scenario, and now she's returned from UK and she is the opposition leader, having no such great understanding. But the civil society is telling, we'll support you, you come in the front, we will take care of the things, we will see. So I think the civil society will respond. After all, even the leaders come of the civil society only. So today or tomorrow, I think the civil societies will certainly respond to, and it will not give chance for what do you say, for undemocratic regimes or illiberal democracies to come in much more or a bigger number. But it also happens and depends on the political culture of that particular nation, how that political culture has been built, how resilient are the citizens, depends on them, that how they want to take it forward. At times it can also backfire, and it can make the leaders more stronger. That's another problem. It's the same society or same civil society that makes them dictators. It's the same civil society that gives them unprecedented power. It's the same society that can also, civil society that can bring down these leaders. Is probably my submission. I think I don't have any other questions.
No, you don't have any other questions, and I think we really
thank
you very much. We are really running out of time. Just two comments I'll make here. One is, I think as far as Belarus is concerned, it is their version of the Arab Spring, because, you know, the civil society, you can push them back. up to a limit, but beyond a point, it will sort of, like a spring, it will come back. So I think that is what I can see happening, and having served in several of these countries where there are democratically authoritarian leaders, this is their worst nightmare, that, how the local people, what could trigger it off and what could, how they could rise. The other is, on this 59 apps also, Dr. Nankishore, one comment that I think the matter would have been very different if this had happened before the Galwan incident. Then there would have been much greater debate. After Galwan, I don't think there was any possibility of anyone opposing it or standing against it. And what you mentioned about New York, that people are coming to the streets and opposing, I think even in Germany, you can see now protests are taking place and people want to go to work and so on and so forth. So we have 5 minutes absolutely to go to 2:45. I really don't want to, impinge upon the time of the next group, because I can see that they must be getting ready. So if Professor Sanjeev, you could kindly limit yourself to about 2 minutes, and Dr. Gulbin Sultana also to 2 minutes. So the floor is yours, please.
Hey, thank you, sir. Thank you for a very nice comment. I'll try to wrap up within 1 minute 30 seconds. The first, my question is not the number of countries, democratic countries are decreasing. My concern is that the advocates or the promoters of the democratic countries are getting crisis themselves. So this will have the big impact in the political order. For example, there will not be any country right now in the world and come to say Nepal, hey, your democracy is weak, because their democracy is getting more weak. So that is my concern. So, and it will have the impact in the global politics. And I think it's important for the Indian foreign policy also, because the Indian foreign policy try to make some sort of scenario for democratic alliance for the last few years, I think. So I think it will need a rethinking on these issues also. And the second, yes, US-EU relations, it has been being a relation of very interesting. They have good relation in a peace and difficult relation in the crisis. So NATO became booming in the 1990s, NATO member increased, but when there was a financial crisis, then they say, hey, you do yourself or go to IMF. So this has become the very different scenario, as you are right. And the G20, what we can see is that we can see one interesting thing is that the superpower are not ready to democratize the international institutions. So that's why I'm telling that the multilateralism is in crisis. We can see from the G20 also. And this crisis will be more difficult in the post-COVID era. My prediction was on that. And regarding the questions asked to me, I don't think the hard power is anymore effective in the post-COVID era. The nuclear weapons cannot fight with the corona. So the countries which are having the nuclear weapons cannot say, follow me, because you did not have helped me in the corona. So we are moving toward, I think, there will be the huge insight from the constructivism theory, and the ideas, beliefs can govern the next world order, but it will go in a transition phase for a long time, because we are not getting these intersubjective idea from the state to international institutions, because the meaning of the international institutions are getting weak and poor for us. I think that's all, since we don't have time. And the last question, can Asia lead? I think we have to ask with the Indian scholar Amitabh Acharya, who wrote Asia will not, because who wrote 10 years ago, Asia will not, because the Asian countries are the rivalry among them, and to get a superpower in the world, the countries should be recognized by the regional powers. I think the corona, if we become success on the making the same master plan for recovery, then it will be the good departure point. Otherwise, it is hard for Asia to lead. That's all, I think.
Thank you very much. And my two very brief comments would be that when you said that India was trying to promote a democratic alliance, India is a member of very many alliances. Very many authoritarian countries. I think in the earlier session we were talking about India's relations with governments in the Middle East, in West Asia. they are not really the epitome of democracies. You would also see that in G20 meetings, whether it was in Osaka last year or in Buenos Aires year before that, India had two smaller meetings. There was the RIC meeting, that is between Mr. Modi, Putin, and Xi Jinping. And also there was a J meeting, which was Japan, America, and India. So both of them on the sidelines of the G20 meetings, and this has really been made something that is, and otherwise also, India has meaning excellent relations with Russia, with China, with a large number of leaders. So not only in terms of the democratic alliance, as far as NATO and other things are concerned, I think it depends, it really has a lot to do with the personality of Mr. Trump. Maybe it has also policy implications there. If we go forward and if we have a different administration in the United States, then we might see that in terms of the partnerships, the alliances that the United States has with other countries, that might be very, very different. So I think individuals can also make a difference positively as well as negatively. And here, many of the challenges that we see that the international community is facing, it is because of the presence of certain individuals, whether it is in the United States, or it is in China, or it is in Turkey or elsewhere. Dr. Gulbin Sultana, your comments, last comments. Let me say, we have already stepped over time 1 minute, but I give you 2 minutes to complete, and then I will convey regret to the organizers that we have shot a few minutes over time, but then we did get 15 minutes less also. Please go ahead.
Very quickly, sir, your first question, that is waiving of the debts. Maldives did make a request, but no, it hasn't received any commitment yet, but the request has been made. And I'll club the questions on India's assistance for repaying Chinese debt and also India's assistance in diversifying its economy. After the President Soli came into power, and during his maiden visit to India, India committed financial assistance. I think as of till now, as together, probably $2 billion has been committed. And India has this commitment both in terms of grants and loans, and it's up to Maldives how they would like to utilize it. But most of the projects which India is providing and they are using, it's basically divided into several categories, improving the skills, and also they have something called high power community development project. These are small projects for the development of the communities. Then also as I mentioned during my presentation, government has a strategic action plan for 2019 to 2023. So one of the I think priority area for them is like diversifying the economy. As I said, they are focusing on the revenue making infrastructure projects and all, like ports and airports. And I think the money India has committed, they will be utilized for this infrastructure development projects also. So I hope I have answered your question, and I can see one question in the chat box also. Revival of tourism sector. The Maldives has experienced this economic crisis before too. For example, during 2004 tsunami, that time also tourism got affected. But it could revive immediately. The property was damaged at that time. They had to wait for some time to reconstruct, to repair the. But after that they could revive it. But now the situation is completely different. It's uncertain. We don't know, because that time the problem was, I think, more domestic. They had to take time. They took time to repair. Repair the properties and all. But here, all the tourists basically they are coming from abroad. And all the tourists, many of the people probably have now this inhibition of fear. Many people probably would not like to go as tourists for holidaying and all. So that uncertainty is there. But if situation gets better and then it will not take much time to revive the tourism sector, because it's a much preferred destination, and it's known for its luxury tourism. And even if situation, if many people are saying that the situation may not, COVID may not disappear totally, but even if it's controlled, then Maldives has a positive point, plus point compared to many other tourist destination, because Maldives follow one resort, one island policy. So it's possible in Maldives to maintain social distance while holidaying. So because of that, probably many of the tourists who would like to holiday during this period, probably Maldives would be probably a preferred destination for many of the tourists. So that's how there is a positive point for Maldives, and they are having agreements like already. I think India and Maldives has this air bubble agreements. They are having this kind of agreements with other countries, and many other countries have positively responded. So there is a hope. Probably they will be. They will be able to revive their tourism, and if tourism revives, it will impact positively on the economy, at least to
Fantastic.
some
Thank you
extent.
very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Gulbin Sultana, for this I think there is a pent-up demand as far as tourism is concerned. And Maldives is definitely a it's a very prime place and a very well-regarded place as far as tourism is concerned. So thank you for ending on such an optimistic note. I see that Dr. Bharti Chibber wants to have 1 minute. So madam, I cannot say no to you. Please, you have the
Thank you.
last word.
Thank you so much, sir. Well, there was a question in the chat box on stand of ASEAN on Indo-Pacific. Well, basically, ASEAN came out with an Indo-Pacific outlook, which highlighted three things. One, of course, the centrality of ASEAN, regional cooperation in the region, and also consensus building. And with this view, they want to have the reins of Indo-Pacific policy in their hands. And of course, they also talk about free and inclusive Indo-Pacific region based on code of conduct and international law. However, critics have argued that the US talks about free and fair, but ASEAN talks about inclusive, which involves China also. So that's kind of contradictory to the US policy. But if you look at the ASEAN history, then it need not be a contradictory, because ASEAN has always believed in centrality of ASEAN as an organization and other sub-organizations and regional cooperation and consensus building in Indo-Pacific. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. And in fact, you could also emphasize and underline that India's policy is also inclusive Indo-Pacific, because
Absolutely.
when Prime Minister Modi spoke at the Shangri-La Summit in 2008, in June 2018, he said very clearly that it is a free and open Indo-Pacific as well as an inclusive Indo-Pacific.
Very true.
And also it's not a strategy, it's just a geographical construct. So
Exactly.
I think we are very much, whether it is India, ASEAN, Japan, or even Australia, I think we are on the same
Page.
same page
Same
as
page.
far as this is concerned, except the United States. But then I think there are these discussions that can continue. So with these words, let me convey my deepest appreciation and compliments to the panelists, Dr. Bharti Chibber, Dr. Nanda Kishore, Professor Sanjeev Humagain, and Dr. Gulbin Sultana. Thank you very much for your excellent presentations and discussions, our conversation. And of course, equally to the very resilient and committed audience participants that have been there. Through the lunch, we have brought you close to 3 o'clock, but you have stayed with all of us, and it is because of the excellent presentations that have been made by the panelists. So congratulations. Thank you. And I hand it back to Nice. All the very best. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you, sir. Thank you for being a
Thank you,
kind
sir.
chair.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you,
Ladies
sir.
and
Thank you.
gentlemen, as we come to the end of the session, I deem it a great honor to propose a vote of thanks on behalf of NICE to all those who have graced us with their presence today and contributed their parts to make this event a resounding success. First of all, I would like to express our profound gratitude and sincere thanks to Ambassador Ashok Sajjanhar for agreeing to chair and moderate the session today. So you were absolutely great, and I'm not the right person to compliment you, but it was so good to listen to you. And of course, thanks to all our speakers for being a part of this event, and you all tremendously delivered your presentations in such a small span of time. Convincing people is definitely a big task. We are really honored to have speakers like you today. We would like to acknowledge our gratitude to all our friends from the diplomatic community, experts, academia, media, and different organizations as well. Finally, I cannot forget the audience. I must mention a deep sense of appreciation for our audience who participated in this webinar and those who are watching us live on the YouTube channel. Thank you for your valuable time and attention and for making the session productive with all the questions.
Thank you.
Thank